Yes, indeed.
So, want to see some crazy shit? The year is 2016. I am walking home with a buddy who I frequently would stay the entire weekend at and then head back home Sunday night. And a little game comes out that I honestly paid zero attention to, called Dark Souls 3. Exclusively knowing the series through a first name basis only, not knowing how the gameplay works, not knowing how it plays, not even really knowing like the cover art for any of the games, I decided to look into Dark Souls 3. It had just come out. It was the week of. My friend bought it, pre-ordered it, and I was like, you know what? Sure, let me watch him play it for a bit. And I was grabbed, to be certain. And I was like, okay. And he plays for a bit, and he gets a little tired of playing. And I go, hey, can I give it a go? And he goes, yeah, sure. And so I start playing. And then I start playing it again, and again, and again, until I catch up to him over the course of the entire night. Where then he requested that I stop playing because he didn't want to be spoiled. And so I stopped playing. And then I was like, wow, that's crazy. So every weekend I would go over and I would play to the point where he had caught up, which I got really pissed at him if he didn't play it at all that week, because that means I didn't get to play it at all. I didn't get Dark Souls 3 until about a year later. I had worked all summer to get an Xbox One at the time. I know, I wish I got a PS4, but it's fine, because that friend then gave me his PS4 for free because he got upgraded to a Pro, so it all worked out in the end. But I got Dark Souls 3 for the Xbox One, and I played it religiously. So I love Dark Souls 3. I played it again and again and again, up until the DLCs come out. I got them as immediately as I could, and I played the ever-living fuck out of them 6 months ago, prior to recording this intro. I was like, you know what? I want to play Dark Souls 3. I just want to play it. It's not going to be too long. It's going to be about like a 20-minute or 20-hour stream, like playthrough. I just want to play it. And then I played it. And I get to the ending of the base game, and you go like, you know what? I'm done. But you know, I do want to start. I want to start a new game. I want to start a different character. I want to do this again. This was fun. So then I do it again. And then halfway through that playthrough, about 15 hours in, I go, yeah, fuck it. Let's do a build for every weapon type. And so that's what I did. And roughly about 100 hours, unironically later, here I am. Here are my personal favorite builds for every weapon type in the game. Now, there are going to be some caveats for this. I don't want to fucking hear anything about stat distribution. These are not, and I cannot emphasize this enough, these are not meta builds. Some of the weapons that I use have better weapons you can use. I just don't like them. I need to make that abundantly clear right now. These are not intended to be min-maxed whatsoever. You can do anything you want with the stat distributions. That's not what we're going to be doing here. That's not what I'm going to be working on here. These are what I would build pretty much every single time if I were to play Dark Souls 3 again and I had to use a specific weapon, or I wanted to use a specific weapon. These are just what I want to want. These are just what I want to do. Okay? I need to make that abundantly clear, because I know that's the first thing that people are going to jump to. Because yes, I know all of the meta weapons. You want to win the game easily? Trust me, I address it in every one of these builds, the do's and don'ts and how to build them. Second of all, because there are more weapon types than save slots in the game, I did have to meld some of the things together. So I'm just going to let you know right now, straight swords, rapiers, one build. Spears, pikes, one build. Have to condense them a lot. Fists and claws, practically the same weapon type. And the last thing I need to address, I did not do bows. I wanted to enjoy myself, and there were already some weapon types that are just inherently dog shit, so I was not going to touch bows, because bows in FromSoft games are famously bad. They are famously no damage dealers, period. Okay? So, thank you everybody for the long wait. It's been a long time. I know, I'll address it at the end, but I just wanted to say that this video is unironically hundreds of hours in the making, and I really hope you enjoy. Peace. Axes are one of the best weapon types in the game, being like omega easy to use, amazing damage, decent speed, and like an absurd amount of stagger. You can also get like 2 like insanely good axes at the beginning of the game, like the deep axe that you get from the mimic, or if you want to grind the big large hollows for the great axe, which after like, I don't know, 20 minutes of like investing in strength, you can dual wield and just have insane damage that just makes like more than half the game completely trivial. Those are not the axes that I decided to choose for the build. Again, these builds aren't the meta, just what I like to play when I play Dark Souls 3. If you want raw damage, then you can rock the Dragon Slayer Great Axe or Yorms as well. You know, of course, with the Dragon Slayer, you're going to need some faith investment. I kind of wanted to go just pure Unga Bunga because that's just what I prefer with axe, and so I went with the Black Knight's Great Axe, or Black Knight's Axe, whatever it's called, just because it looks really cool, and the addition of the unique moveset, which admittedly is not like the best, but like it's a cool build and it's such a cool axe, so you kind of work around it despite it being slow, which is why for the offset you would go with Eleonora, which is a pretty decent fast axe. It also looks really cool. However, you can trade this with any other kind of like medium level battle axe because it's the same moveset. I just like it because it looks a little unique and it has that little access to like regen, which I wouldn't really use. Granted, Eleonora is kind of meager, but it can easily take care of all the mobs and leave the larger axe to deal with the bosses. To me, axes like scream like gladiator kind of build, so for the appearance I went with the Gundyr armor for like the sick abs and the exile mask gauntlets to give like a little bit of like kind of like mysterious but like powerful. The Elvis leggings adds a little bit of bulk to the rest of the set, and for the rings we're going to rock the Chloranthy ring, have a ring of Favor, and the Night Slayer for just pure Unga Bunga. Get in there and kill. Not a lot of spells for this build, but if you really wanted to use Power Within, you can. I'm not going to grind for that, and it's not going to be in any of the other builds because it is just a pain in the ass to get, and I'm not going to get it, but you'll have plenty of power without it, in my opinion. So I'll fully admit, when I was first playing Dark Souls 3 on stream, I was just playing for fun. I wasn't really intended to making this whole ass like video that ended up taking more than 100 hours to make. Please watch. But in games like this, and frankly in most games that require live action combat skill, I really don't gravitate towards spears at all. I don't love them as a weapon. Unless it's like Monster Hunter, for the most part, it's just poke, 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 and I don't really like that. It's why I don't really like a lot of like generic weapons in fantasy settings either, swords being one of them. Spears are just up there where like very few IPs tend to make spears necessarily cool, and they're just so boring. So I've never really done spears at all in any kind of Dark Souls or FromSoft era ever, because at the end of the day they are just poke, poke, poke. So I was really racking my brain in how to make this a good build for like myself and for people to watch, and I came up with one, but it requires a lot of like but-ums. So the spear like archetype weapon is technically divided into two, but like technically three, being spears, pikes, and halberds. Halberds are their own thing, granted, but spears and pikes are practically the same thing, just like there's a little bit of nuance between the three of them. But this build is pretty contextual for all three of them, so that's why I'm adding them here. So I spent most of the run rocking the Great Lance, which I actually had to gruesomely defeat the Dancer with a dinky ass spear, which kind of sucked, but it was a little bit fun too, because Dancer has a pretty interesting moveset once you like spend some time with her. But, you know, you kill her early, and then you can just run straight on through, and you can nab the Great Lance, which will take some investment into and some dedication to using, because it's extremely slow. But I always said to myself, if I'm going to be using a spear, I want to use the Great Lance, because it's so comically large, and it's so absurdly bulky, and I figured, like, you know, it's the only thing I really wanted to do. And it being a spear build, pike build, and halberd build as well, I really wanted to use the shield. So this is like the big tank build of like all of these builds together. I try to make a little build a little bit unique, and so this one is going to be like the brick shithouse basically. So we're going to be rocking the Great Lance. For shield, there's a lot you can use. And also, on a side tangent, like the shield poke is definitely not nearly as good as it was in like Elden Ring. It's still usable, but you need an obscene amount of stamina for some reason. Anyway, final build for the pike will be for the Great Lance, Havel's shield with the Ring of Steel, Prisoner's Chain, Ring of Favor, and Havel's Ring, because you are going to need all the equipment load you can get. If you want to swap the shield out for any of the other tower shields, Yorm is a pretty good example, but I went for just the raw output, because if you're going to be using a great shield, you might as well just use the best, right? There's no real point into picking favorites when the stats aren't there. But if you want to use a spear, then the whole game, you can rock the Dragon Slayer Sword Spear, which despite not technically being a spear is labeled a spear, so you can use that as a spear if you want. You just gotta kill the Nameless King, and then his boss soul can unlock it for you. And then if you want to use the halberd, there are some really good options ultimately. I didn't really toy with them. There's Gundir's halberd, which is one. There's the Black Leaf halberd, I think it's called. I'm probably wrong. Right outside of the first DLC, you talk to the merchant lady, and she can sell you that Spin to Win halberd, which is pretty good. But ultimately, I went with the Wing Knight's halberd because I like the big weapons, and you can get it like immediately early, which is a pretty good criteria for me to pick a weapon for the run, at least to like extremely like to narrow down to determine if I'm going to be using it. And I've also, like, it's also just always been, like, one of my favorite weapons in the game. It's simple, it's large, and in charge. To accompany the larger-than-life weapons, you rock the full Knight gear, Lothric Knight, helm and armor, Shadow Gauntlets, just because it looks a little bit more fluent with everything. With the Silver Knight leggings, and you rock the same builds as the ones previously said. Ring of Steel, Prisoner Chain, Ring of Favor, and Havel Ring all together. Not too much of a difference. The build requires a lot of investment in like a lot of things, so I did eventually attempt to add spells, but it's just the stats were just spread way too thin, so I opted out of dumping all that into dumping out all like the intelligence into just raw faith if you want to use the Dragon Slayer, and if not, I would really just recommend you dumping it into a mix of like your health, your stamina, and equipment load, just to make sure you're not fat rolling and that you can actually have stamina to do whatever you need to do. This build was continuous the entire time. It is a little weak overall, but you do have so much bulk that it does make up for any mistakes you make along the way. Doing the hammer run really surprised me in Dark Souls 3, because hammer might be just probably the best raw damage in the game. I don't think I've seen damage this high, even with like the basic greatswords. And you can escalate any kind of like insane damage on basic weapons so much further with like any kind of weapon enchantment. If you have to pick some, I would recommend going with magic weapon or Karthus Flame Mark, because if you choose the Deprived as your starting class, you will have the base stats just needed to use it, and that will add like 30% damage onto it. And you know, magic weapon you can get almost immediately right away in the game, which is pretty massive, but it does fall off really fast because a lot of things are resistant to magic. And then the moment you get Karthus Flame Mark, I think I would rather just use that the entire game, because there are so many fucking things that are weak to fire in Dark Souls 3. It is insane. Obviously, if you're investing a lot into Faith, you can always do the Dark Weapon or Lightning Weapon, but obviously I would just recommend just doing Karthus Flame Mark if you're not going for like a chosen elemental build. I kind of knew what weapon I wanted to rock going in, and I didn't actually think, nor at the time, that I think this actually might be as close to me as intentionally choosing a meta weapon. I just didn't know that it was meta at the time. The Great Mace that the Cathedral Knights in the Cathedral of the Deep tend to drop, it's just a massive fucking bonk stick that does a fuck load of damage. There are other weapons I did try to use. I tried to use the Vort's Hammer, Havel's Great Tooth, which can also be buffed for some reason, which is insane. And I also did go all the way up to the second DLC to try Leto's Great Hammer. But unless you have like strength of like 80 or something, I believe the Great Mace at level 10 with heavy weapon enchantment just barely outsqueaks Havel's Great Tooth, which is so bonkers to me. So if you pair that with the Canvas Talisman, also at level 10, with Lightning Blade, which is what I did during this run, the damage can get upward to around like 700 base, which is absurd. So, you know, just go with that. I did choose this to be like the Faith build, so I would rock the Cathedral Knight armor and gauntlets, as well as the Vanelheim leggings, along with the rings, Prisoner Chain, Ring of Favor, Havel Ring, and Ring of Steel. If you ever want to, you could probably have the easiest and smoothest run of Dark Souls 3. This is probably like the easiest and best way to play it. So for the straight sword build, I opted to go towards Mage, and I'm gonna conglomerate a couple of other builds into this one too, because I do think there's a lot of good overlap. Coming from like the great swords and, you know, coming from the straight swords to like daggers and rapiers, all that kind of thing. I kind of clumped them all pretty much into this build with some very minor changes. So I ultimately ended up to use, sorry, I don't know what I'm saying. I originally wanted to go using the Lothric's straight sword for the longest time, but unfortunately I just found that like straight swords, they really fall off rather fast. So despite starting out fairly strong with extremely good attack speed and decent damage, less than favorable stun and stagger, but ultimately like the damage speed is where it was, and that does really fall off mid-game. And then late game, you're really getting punished for just hitting things when you should hit them with something else. So it sucks. So right after like Karthus, I would say it's time to really like change things up, because I really struggled with Irithyll and on. Especially with like whatever like buff I wanted to use with like magic, considering all of Irithyll and then all of Anorlando, everyone is ridiculously resistant to magic, so being a mage wasn't exactly the best experience, but Ultimately, I did end up going with the Goddard Twin Swords with Magic Weapon. I do know that back in the day when Dark Souls 3 came out, this was probably one of the easiest and best weapon combinations, and it still is extremely strong. So ultimately, I did have to go at that just so I could feel like I wasn't pathetically weak the entire game. Full magic room, so with the Court Sorcerer Staff, the big Sage's Hat, the Pontiff Knight Armor for that nice, beautiful glisten, and then the Outrider Knight Gauntlets and leggings to kind of, you know, make together with like a nice blue / like ice theme, despite me not using any frost sorceries. It does really add in nicely. As for the spells, I actually don't think a lot of the spells are necessarily good in this game unless you deliberately build around the spells being good. But considering all these builds are exclusively for like PvE, I'm not really going to do that. There's a lot of sacrifices you have to do. You basically are going to get one shot. So I didn't really want that, considering, you know, I'm not like the best player. So as for magic, we're just going to go with Crystal Magic Weapon and Soul Stream, considering most of the damage we're going to be doing is with the weapons themselves, and again, not really the spells. But I did want to hit with like the big one just when you're fighting off against a boss like a Soul of Cinder or like even like Father Ariandel. It is good to just have like a big weapon that a big attack that you can hit from like kind of far away, especially considering if you get like blocked off or like it's just not really worth it to run in at the moment. For the rings, we're gonna go with Dusk Crown ring, Chloranthy Lingering Dragon Crest, and then the Pontiff's Right Eye. This build took way too much like trial and error to kind of like get down. It's definitely not like the hardest build I ever had to do in the game, but it's definitely it was tricky. I did die more than a few times, and it was just because my damage just wasn't there. I think I'm comfortably saying that this is the like the end all of like the mage build, and you could probably tweak it and make it a little bit better, but there's the problem with magic is that you're always going to like sacrifice something, and I think that going for just R1 spam in this case is ultimately the better option. So tackling on what I wanted to use with the straight sword, it's pretty much the exact same gear as the mage build for the rapiers. It's going to be the Ricard's rapier. Now, for the most part, I did not really invest a lot of time into the rapiers in this game. There's not even any footage for me to care to record because there's really not much here. There's only about 3, maybe 4 rapiers in the game, and from what I can tell, Ricard is the best one. Just use the same thing and just replace. Actually, I wouldn't even replace. I think Ricard's rapier can even be buffed. So yeah, I would use the exact same thing. I would just, for my own prosperity, I would just change the helmet from the Great Sage's hat to the Painted Guardian's hood just to differentiate it a little bit, but ultimately, you know, just use the same build. I don't really care for rapiers. What do you want from me? Bye. Now, I had a decent mindset of what I wanted to do for most of the builds in this game. With all the weapon types, I kind of had a general direction on where to go to. But this was probably the only build where I absolutely knew from the moment where I was going, what I was committed to do, and the overall final build. Because when I first played Dark Souls 3, this was the first weapon that I really felt like I was like, oh wow, awesome, a rare drop, and I have loved it. I have done this build several times, probably like a dozen, especially on like Xbox when I first was playing Dark Souls 3. Like for the first time on my own, it was just one of my favorite. The Warden Twin Blades. This is one of the coolest weapons in all the FromSoft games, in my opinion. It's just so cool. It does have the built-in bleed, which you can buff even further if you want to apply another element like frost or poison, or even infuse bleed onto it, or if you just want to use it with sharp, which is what I did. It will always have a little bit of bleed to just tack on. I also wanted to go with the full, like, more like Sauron build, like the evil motherfucker kind of build, because, you know, it is bleed. We're going to go with the Fire Witch Helm, the Armor of Thorns, Fire Witch Gauntlets, and then the Black Iron Leggings to kind of make you look as menacing as possible. In addition, if you don't want to use the dual weapons, I can understand that. That does have some cons in this game. I would then simply just recommend using the Karthus Great Curved Sword in addition. Normal curved swords do eventually fall off in this game, so you will eventually... the natural pivot is you just need to upgrade to a Great Curved Sword. Karthus has probably like one of the best ones in the game as well, because you can buff it and then you can enchant it at the same time. Which, in that case, I would recommend using Karthus Flame Mark, because fire is disgusting. Rings are going to be extremely simple. For the build is extremely easy for the most part. It doesn't really require a lot of insane investment. All you have to do is really go a lot of dex and stamina, and then everything that will just melt around you. As for the rings, we're going to go with the Pontiff's left and right eye cleanse ring, and then the Ring of Favor. Just squeeze out as much multi-hit damage as you possibly can. If you really want, you can use Karthus Beacon, I think is the spell name, to increase your damage further. In my opinion, it doesn't nearly last as long as you want it to, and I would not really recommend sacrificing a ring slot for any kind of like spell extension. I don't think it's gonna... It doesn't really crank up the length to any significant amount, and everything else, all the other rings are really just what puts it over the edge. So every point in doing like a challenge run like this, which is why I don't particularly love doing challenges like this to begin with, is that eventually you're going to be stuck with like the shitty part of it. And for this, it's 1000% going to be the whips. Whips are just really bad. They're never good in this game, and they will never be good in this game. Despite having some things that technically benefit the whips, it's never enough to make up for the fact that there's no backstabs, there's no plunge attacks. The fact that there's maybe like 4 whips in the game and only 1, maybe 2 of them are good. And the coolest whip in the game is not considered a whip. It's, despite being called a whip, it is a flail. Objectively, it is just not a whip. This is just going to be... So I did it... Sorry. That being said, I did dedicate this entire build just to becoming the flame build. The pyromancy build. Obviously, I did use the whip. I just didn't use it nearly as much. The last whip that you get in the base game, which is the Witch's Locks, is going to be the best because this is a pyromancy build first and foremost. And that whip is fire, and its addition is fire, and it does accompany the fire quite well. If you really don't want to use pyromancy, that's fine. You don't have to, although I think you should, especially when you're using the whip, if you want to use the whip for whatever reason. But you can also just use like a simple like Kestis with like the simple enchantment in your offhand, just to give you that little extra like health mana regen, because the best and most damaging part of the whip is it's going to be its like flurry weapon art ability, which actually doesn't do too bad. It's just you stand there and you don't really have a lot to do there, so it's a bit of a commitment, especially in later fights. But for the gear, we're going to go with the Pyromancy Hood, the Northern Armor, Exile Gauntlets, and Leggings, along with these rings, which are going to be Ring of Favor, Sage Ring, Witch's Ring, and the Great Swamp Ring. All these together will give you a massive boost in Pyromancy damage. Obviously, I don't truly recommend using this build against like the 2 Demon Princes or the old Demon King. Obviously, you know, bosses and creatures that are highly resistant to fire aren't going to be doing, you know, aren't going to be taking like excessive damage, but I still think that they're going to be taking like a decent amount, especially for, you know, how resistant they are. For the spells, we're going to go with the Chaos Flame, because you lob 3 of those on and you have like 7 damage procs. It does obscene amount of damage. And the Profane Flame, because a lot of these smaller bosses such as Freed, they do like to dodge projectiles, but they also can't really dodge explosions that just spawn on top of them, which is what the Profane Flame does. If you really want to swap it out, you can do the Delayed Mines that you get from the Demon Prince, although at that point Freed doesn't really matter because Freed will be dead. But you can swap out pretty much the Profane Flame with any other kind of pyromancy spell you want. I just like the Profane Flame. I think it's really good to catch a lot of the more slippery bosses that Chaos Flame would normally miss on, but that's really about it. So going back, you can't really do anything crazy with the weapon, with whips in general. There's no backstabbing, there's no plunging, so they are effectively like a random weapon that is incomplete in the game. So it's a miracle that I even managed to get as far as I did with them, but I will never be doing whips again. In conjunction to the whips, I thought the Fist and Claws would definitely be up there for like being objectively bad, and I was right up until a certain point. If you go to the DLC right away, as soon as you can, rush to it. You can struggle and finagle yourself up to get the Crow Talons, which is in like the little village in the Ashes of Ariandel. Not only can the weapon be buffed, but it also has like an absurd, insane weapon art that just does insane damage and will pretty much guarantee a bleed on anything. So for this, I did go pure like Gremlin mode. We're gonna go with the Thrall Hood, Grave Warden Robe, the Dark Gauntlets, Wolf Knight Leggings, and go with this. We're gonna go with the Ring of Favor of the Pontiff's Left Horn, the Hornet Ring, and the Chloranthy Ring, all to just go full glass cannon, balls to the walls damage. We can go with the Carthage Flame Mark because it's extremely busted in Dark Souls 3, as I keep saying. A lot of enemies are super weak to it, but I did not expect to just reach the raw damage output as I did with this game. Larger bosses completely crumbled to this. It was actually extremely fun, and not to mention, this was probably one of the fastest completed runs in the entire game, which is like crazy because the moment you get the Crow Talons, you just dump everything into dexterity and stamina, and shit just dies. Reapers was another build that definitely surprised me. I thought it was going to be very much a lot of fun. I was anticipating doing it quite a bit. Little did I know that this is probably one of the worst actual weapons in the game next to the whips in general. Reapers, or scythes as they're also should be called, but there's only 3 of them in the game, and they're all really, really bad. There is also the one in the DLC that I am going to end up using here, but for the most part, the base weapon scythes are all extremely bad. There is the Great Scythe, which is probably the main one that everyone would be using. There is the I don't even remember what it's called, the Bleed Scythe that you get from the Crucifixion Woods from the Storytellers, which is just awful. Yes, it does have a lot of bleed buildup, but that self-inflicted bleed is also pretty fucking bad. And then there's the Irithel Knight Frost one, which despite looking really cool, Frost is just unfortunately just so half-assed in this game. I really wish they would save that weapon and put it into Elden Ring. It would have been a much better weapon overall. And then there's the Freed Scythe, which is the one that you get in the DLC. Every one of these is not particularly good, but if you really want to make a good investment in the Reapers, I would also make a fitting theme of doing like more dark sorceries as well, just because you have a little something. Now, a lot of the dark sorceries are also pretty fucking bad, so ultimately I would go with the dark pyromancies, because again, it's just more fire damage in your disposal to make up for the shit that is the Scythe. That being said, the Scythes, they can backstab, they can plunge, so they are like a legitimate weapon. They can, in fact, be used, but you're not going to see any kind of decent damage output until you get Freed Scythe, which has it's some pretty decent scaling. It just requires a lot more stat investment overall, especially if you want to use the weapon art pretty well. You're going to need a lot of intelligence. You're going to need a lot of stamina. You're going to need a lot of attunement. There we go. That's the word. Just you're not going to need like a lot. Or sorry, you're going to need a lot. I can't fucking talk today. You're going to need a lot. But anyway, for the gear, we're going to rock with the Aristocrat's Mask, Court Sorcerer's Robe, Silver Knight Gauntlets, and the Pontiff Knight Leggings, along with the Dark Clutch Ring, Florentine Ring, Witch's Ring, and Ring of Favor. Considering spells are very limited, we're going to go with the Black Serpent Flame and the Black Fire. Black Serpent Ring does shockingly insane armor damage, so if someone's hiding behind a shield, the Black Serpent Ring will almost exclusively break it for you. And Black Fire, considering it's considered a pyromancy and a dark like spell, Dark Clutch Ring and the Witch's Ring both add on to the damage, so it's going to be pretty decent. It's not going to be like the best thing in the world. There's definitely going to be a lot better, but it's going to be pretty decent. The side thing itself does have the shame of having a sweet spot, which unless you pivot yourself perfectly, you're not going to be doing the best damage you can, but it is kind of like what it is, you know? So you're not going to be doing some outstanding damage, so this build is ultimately kind of like a little, but you know, if you're going to be doing a gimmick run, this is definitely going to encourage you to think outside of the box. It's definitely going to encourage you not to just spam R1. There are benefits to it, right? It's in comparison to a lot of the other builds, it's just not nearly as good. Now, going in, I honestly thought I would have the same mindset with the daggers as I did with the rapiers. Them being like, there's not a whole bunch of daggers, or at least not a lot that are interesting, and that it would just be pretty fucking boring. But there is one specific weapon that completely changed how I look at things, because honestly, I was just going to mark it up to be like, fuck it, I don't want to do it. This is just going to be bad, and it's going to be annoying. However, the Aquamarine Dagger is probably one of the most interesting weapons in the entire game, because if you actually do a build around it, like with intelligence and stuff, you can actually be kind of fucking cracked, as you can see with the video that you see before me, just completely fucking up the Demon Prince. With the help of the, like, I did have help doing the Demon Prince, granted, but I wasn't going to rock that shit alone, not with a weapon that I, at the time, had zero faith in. The only thing I would really change is, considering that it is a special type of weapon class, you can't really enhance it, so I would just replace Crystal Weapon with whatever you really want. I did Crystal Spear in this case, in Soul Mass, but as far as gear and rings and stats, all that, it would be the exact same as the other mage builds. So, obviously going into the Great Swords, we all kind of knew that it was going to be the contestant for one of the largest damage outputs in the game, and it was either going to be Great Hammers or Great Swords. Now, I do think that Hammers ultimately do win overall, but Great Swords, there's just way more to choose from, and a lot more of them have a lot more pizzazz. I did generally make it a rule to not include any kind of endgame DLC weapons because you can't really experience the base game with them unless you cheat them in or you want to go through New Game Plus, but in my opinion that's just not the same experience as starting at with a low level and going in through the entire game and working your way to get it. So I didn't really include like the Ring Knight Great Sword or any of the endgame Great Swords or anything like that. I looked at the Cathedral Knight Greatsword is the greatsword that I ultimately went with. I also looked at the Executioner's Greatsword. I did look at the Fume Ultra, the Fog's Greatsword, whatever the fuck it's called, and I did look at the normal Greatsword. And although the Greatsword and the Cathedral Knight Greatsword do have a lot in common, I ultimately took out a little bit of the range for a little bit more damage with the Cathedral Knight Greatsword, considering I just think it looks really cool too. In fact, I think it's one of the coolest looking basic swords in the game. And it can be buffed, which is, in my opinion, always going to be insane in this game overall, over like a special grade kind of weapon, because just weapon buffing is insane. Now, if you want best of both worlds, I would recommend you can also look into the Pontiff swords. I think those swords are also really good. Out of the two, I would choose the Profane Greatsword. There is also the Solid Cinder Greatsword too, but none of the damage ever even kind of came close to a Cathedral Knight Greatsword infused with heavy, max strength stat, and then also being able to be buffed weapon-wise too. So for gear, we're going to go with the Black Iron Helm, the Undead Legion Armor, the Wolf Knight Gauntlets, the Black Knight Leggings, Knight Slayer Ring, Chloranthy Ring, Sun Princess Ring, just for a little bit of regen, and for the Ring of Favor. There is no need for any spells, in my opinion. Again, if you really want to hunt down for power within, you can do that. It will be offset by the Sun Princess Ring. It's just a pain in the ass. I'm not doing that shit. Technically, every one of these builds would benefit from it, but I'm not going to invest all that time into doing it again and again and again. That's just a pain in the ass, and I'm not going to do it. But you won't really need it because the Greatsword damage output is so fucking high that you can have a great time the entire game and not even break a sweat. And here we come to the final build, the katanas. In my opinion, the fucking most boring, most basic ass build in the entire game. I did have a little bit of fun at the beginning, but once you kind of got your build done, it was so fucking... It sucked really bad. But the katanas are really bad. And sorry, here's why. I can just say they're bad all the day. You get the Uchi Katana first thing in the game, which is probably one of the best katanas that you can get, right? It's insane that they let you to start it off with it in fucking Elden Ring, because it's such a solid weapon. And it has built-in parry, it has built-in bleed, it has really high stagger, and it has really good heavy charge time, which is it's just an overall insane weapon. The other katanas you get are far and few between. Obviously, you can get the Dark Blade, you can get the Chaos Blade, you can get, not the Dark Blade, you can get the Glass Blade, the one that Yuria has. You can get the Chaos Blade, you can get the Washing Pole, and you can get the Onikiri and Obadachi combination one. Not to mention, you can get the one that Midir gives you, the Dark Drift, which is just such an insane weapon, but you get it way too late, so it doesn't even really matter. For my build, I wanted to spice things up a little bit. I didn't go with anything that couldn't be buffed, so it really tied down to Uchi Katana or Onikiri and Obadachi. Now, I prefer doing dual weapons more than a single weapon. And granted, you could do the Washing Pole too. Washing Pole is an obscenely good weapon in this game too. Weapon durability doesn't mean anything when there's a bonfire every 10-20 minutes. Dark Souls 3, folks. But I went with going more of like a dark holy build, kind of to tie everything up together. Sorry, I'm tripping over my tongue a lot. With the Dark Blade, I went with the Onikiri Obadachi. Canvas Talisman is one of the best talismans in the game. The Belial Mask, the Fallen Knight Armor, Gauntlets of Thorns, and the Cleric Trousers with the Corinthian Ring, the Pontiff Right Ring, Pontiff Right Eye Ring, Ring of Favor, and the Karthus Milkwood Ring, just to squeeze out as much dex as possible. This is an extremely easy build to get. You can kind of get everything done by Karthus, I would say. Even after like Cathedral of the Deep, you don't even have to get the Karthus. So probably rate like in between like Farron Woods, you can kind of get everything done here. Obviously, the Onikiri no Badachi you're not going to get till much later, but the Watching Pole you can get until Anorlando. But until then, you can just do the Chaos Blade. You can do the Uchigatana, which will carry you the entire way. You really don't any weapon isn't necessarily bad here. It's just it's just a matter of like your personal preferences. But ultimately, once I kind of got this build figured out, which was the fun part, the entire run just became really boring because you just go and you fight and you kill. Before you say anything, this was not the last build I did, so I was not completely burnt out of Dark Souls at the time. This was probably the third or fourth one, and I still had a good 6 or 7 left after that. So this was definitely not the last one I had to do in conjunction of everything, but this was probably one of the most like boring ones. I did this shit off camera completely. So I even did the Madeir fight. I did it live on stream, so I thought it would be fun, and it took a couple tries, but I did it, which I was really surprised if. It's one of the very few times I actually kill Madeir, because I don't normally fight Madeir. So outside of that, it's pretty cool, but I didn't have an amazing time with this build, but I really hope you did. And there we go. You know, I'm recording this right at the end of editing because I wanted it to be as like authentic as possible. I said it a few times, and I looked it up specifically. This took 137 hours, if I can conclude the 3 hours it took to edit this far. Still haven't worked on a thumbnail, but that shouldn't be a problem. I can work on that relaxation free for the most part. Thank you, everyone. I know the channel has been in a weird state right now where I only post one video a week rather than a video every week. I'm trying to change life up a bit. It's just getting too stressful to do a video every day, not to mention I still have videos that don't have a single view on them, so it really encourages me to put a lot more effort into a larger video every now and then, which I think is like the way to go. I still have plans, obviously. I still want to stream when I can. Work is not allowing me right now. I have so much in my week that I have to take care of right now, and I'm not in a situation where I can deny that time. I kind of need it, like financially, unfortunately, which sucks. It's a conversation that no one really wants to be public about, but I have to work right now. I can't afford to just call in every day and then stream. So that's the only reason why I'm not streaming. Same thing with like content creation. This took probably a whole month longer than it should have been to come out, and I'm very glad that it's done. You know, if you see this, thank you so much for staying to the end. This took a while, but I had a blast. None of this shit was like truly a slog. Maybe the whip run, that one was shitty, but everything else ultimately was fun. Phone, stop. But thank you everybody for watching. It means a lot, and this is far from the last video that I have planned that I really want to do in terms of like large production. So I really hope you all stay tuned. Thank you everybody for watching. Have a good day. Have a fucking day. Peace.